All right, everybody. So I just wanted to go through and just kind of break down how I made this project. I'll just go through all the node tree and the logic that went into some of these things. Yeah, here we go. So essentially what we did here was I started from a line, resampled it so I can get my curve U attribute, and that's a 0 to 1 attribute that's going across the line here. We're going to use that later on down the road. The orient along curve, so that gives us orientation for y-axis, z, and the tangent. Our pin group, so this just this gives us a group that's going to give us our bottom point to pin in our Vellum simulation. And then this group by range. So I just wanted the top 4 points to create this emit group. And this is basically going to be how I set up my my hairs. I was going to emit from it, but I changed it. So the thickness, this here is basically going to be used inside of the sweep node to set the thickness. And also set the thickness for the Vellum constraint properties. I'll show you that in a second. Then a very typical torus through some normals on it and a mountain to deform it. I animated the mountain. And one thing that'll happen with if you're trying to scatter points on a mountain and it's animated, they will constantly change and move around. So your point count's going to change. So you have to basically pin them to the geometry. And so you do that with you time shift it and then you scatter. So that way you have your time shift is just set to frame 1. And then you interpolate the point data based on the source prim and the prim UVs. And you actually can get that data out of the scatter node. So you just output these 2 attributes, and then you interpolate the prim UV, and then what it does is it basically just locks all the points onto the geometry. And then here I just created the p-scale attribute, a value of 1, and then here I just did a randomize of just random values, and then we copy the points. And then with the copy to points, I'm going to turn this guy and this guy off. Yeah, so the copied points gives us, all 5,000, I think. Yeah, 5,000 points now have lines scattered onto them. So I set up a class attribute on the points. So that basically just gives me, it gives me grouping. So the class is sort of, it goes from 0 to, I believe, 5,000, to 4,999. And that's going to be used as an identifier later on. I'll go into the Vellum hair. Here, let me go into this. So then what I wanted to do was break off the chain here so that I could set up the infection simulation. And so I got my pinpoints by using the group expression here over the points. Basically, you're just taking the vertex primitive index in the incoming geometry, and the vertex index number is 0. And so you're grouping it by the base, by the first point of each primitive. So you get this entire group. So now I just blasted away everything that was not that group. So I'm just getting those points. This shape fall off is my animated. This is basically how things infect. So this goes in and touches the geometry, and that gives me my shape fall off, my MOPs shape fall off, MOPs fall off attribute. There we go. So the MOPs infection solver basically will take that attribute, and so as you can see here, I actually don't need this. So the infection start attribute is going to be the MOPs fall off. You can probably do this with any kind of attribute over the points. And so, so basically this, as soon as it touches, it triggers, and then it just flows across based on some spreading values of minimum search, maximum points, a little bit of remapping, because I actually needed to remap this because for pinpoints need a value of 1 to be pinned and 0 releases them. So I inverted the MOPs fall off noise there. And then the noise just kind of gives you a little variation on how you can see how it's got a little bit of, just variation in the way that it's climbing. Okay, I'll go over to the Vellum hair constraints here. These are pretty easy, pretty basic here. I just density I didn't change. I calculated the varying based on a scale by attribute. So this essentially creates these constraint properties that gives you the thickness, which we set up here in this thickness value here. So this thickness is established pre-sim into this, and so that way all the collisions and everything, bending and all those good stuff, all the good stuff that Vellum does, is calculated the way that we expect it to be calculated. I added a little bit of dampening, and I believe I brought my bend stiffness down. Next was the pin constraints. So the pin constraints, you can do this here. Let's see, in the pin to animation pinpoints, I threw them in this one just so I kind of visually knew that this was happening. So I just changed it to that pin group, which we originally set up in here, which, trailed down into it and then into the solver. Now, the one thing that we needed, I'll stop processing here. So what I needed to also do is take this fall off attribute and establish it along the constraint geometry, since we know that there's geometry and there's constraint geometry, right, that the Vellum sims on. And let's just get this to actually stop here. There we go. And so I just did a transfer of the infected to the constraint geometry. And so basically what you get is you get the MOPs fall off attribute. There we go. And that is going to continue through and do the infection over the constraints. And the reason why I wanted to do that is I did a couple things here. Let's stop calculating. Okay. So the first thing that I needed to do, let's just turn this off here. And okay, I'll just pin it. Okay, so in this wrangle, I needed to create a stopped attribute. So I brought in the MOPs fall off attribute that was running over the point numbers, and I created an attribute in the solver called stop. So this is running every frame, right? So it's looking at every frame to create these things. The next thing is I took that same fall off coming in, and basically I set this group to be released. So what you can see here is that while the sim is caching, this group here is going to be populated. The next thing that I wanted to do was bring I needed to get this data also onto the constraint geometry. So I brought that in. I used so if you see, we branched it up. We branched out here, out MOPs con. So this is my my constraint geometry. So I grabbed that SOP as an input, and then I bound it to my constraint geometry. So that way we're actually running this data over the constraint geometry. And the reason why is I wanted to do it. I wanted to do some velocity constraint property adjustments based on that group being released. And so I just blended the velocity, which honestly, I don't know how much. Blend every 24th of second only applies. So I don't know how much that actually influenced anything, but I did want to change the rest scale. So yeah, so it's calculating the rest scale. The next thing in terms of forces, it's really just a basic pop wind with some noise amplitude. And so it's just kind of swirling around. The next thing is my force. So the force here is giving me a negative Y force of 0.25. So that way, while everything is simming, where the wind is blowing everything just kind of randomly everywhere, this force is going to be running across the group released and then pushing everything down. So that way everything's falling away. And taking that same group, I'm using a curve that I drew that you can see here. So this is just kind of it's just a curve not much more to say there. And so I brought that into the pop curve axis, pop curve force. And so this will create this follow and suction and orbital force. So basically it's just pulling it down, it's sucking it into the middle, and then it's swirling it around. So it just kind of gives it's just a really cool force. I like playing with it. And then some drag to just kind of slow down everything. And that was the Vellum simulation. So then post sim, what I wanted to do is actually copy this fall off attribute to run over. Oh, by the way, this is kind of a bug. I don't know why this happens, but it'll just stay inside of the Vellum scene. So if that ever happens to you, if you don't have labs, you should definitely install it. They have this labs reset viewport. So it will reset your viewport and everything runs fine. So yeah, so the fall off attribute, I wanted to bring it in. So it's somewhere in this. I'm not going to sim it. I'll show it to you in down here. And what I did was I took that attribute and I remapped it to my color. And the reason I did that was because, okay, so now it's, I'll show you why I did that. So we have the color. I deleted all the attributes except for the ones that I wanted inside of the sim. And then I cached it. So in my cache, what you'll see is you got the black, right? So that was me setting the color there. So that just gave me just another. Let's not sim that. Everything's gonna break if I. There we go. Not broken, but it'll just annoy me. Anyways, so this gave me our out splines. So the next thing what I wanted to do is set a group that was called released, because that release group wasn't, well, it's here. Oh, interesting. So there's my release group, which I guess I didn't need to do. Got it. So my logic behind the black was to set the value and then bring that out so that I could set my own group based on the color value. And so that way, when this turns to black, it's giving me this release group. But looks like there's a little bit of redundancy. So we don't need this. We can kill it. This add ID, the integer ID attribute running over each of the points. So this is just setting an ID. That's really it. We're just creating an integer value that we're going to use inside of the MOPs infection a little bit later down. So here, what I did was I blasted away. I split the stream. So what I wanted to do here was I needed to process this kind of everything separately, right? So I needed to get the released out, the ones that are actually released out, not released, and so that way I can control just some additional properties. Then I threw down a sweep here, which was nothing too crazy. It takes the thickness value that we already had determined way up the chain, and you can do a little bit of extra control along here if you wanted to. I created a group, which honestly I didn't use, and then just created some out nulls that I'll use later on, which this is again redundant, but that's fine. The release, what I did here was I increased the point count here. So we just had 100 points on each one of these lines that are being released. And I want to do that just so I kind of had really smooth sim, smooth fall off and everything on later on. And then, so now we have this group start. So back to our group expression, getting the first point of each primitive. Now I deleted some additional attributes that I didn't need in here, and then I created an infect attribute on the start group. So just those start points are getting this infect attribute, right? And then I blasted away. So Right. So I blasted away everything, the primitives, and just kept the points essentially. So I just have the start points here. Now, the reason for creating this infect attribute just on those points was that I was going to be using it. I was going to be using it as a start group, but what I ended up doing is pulling out these points and making these my my start group that runs the infection fall off here. So instead of using an attribute, what I did was I used enabled input infectors. So basically, as soon as the next piece of geometry comes in, it's going to see that, hey, this point is an infected point, and then it's going to basically start spreading based on this radius and the max amount of points that it's going to connect to. And then you can kind of see how that grows here. So now the next part that I needed to do was establish. Oh, we gonna crash? Okay. What I wanted to do was I needed the MOPs infection to. Let's just frame it here. So that So basically what I did was once this attribute fall off is greater than or equal to 0.5, what I want you to do is start blasting away the points. So that way it's kind of gradually deleting the points away. The point VOP here, I just took the velocity force that was already on the points from the Vellum sim, brought it in, multiplied it by a random value. And this was just kind of adding some variation to the velocity. Which, you know, kind of sort of, you can tell that there's a little bit of difference. It kind of changes it up a bit. And then I threw everything into our pop sim. Wait for it. Okay, we're back. The pop sim. So I'm just bringing the input, changing my birth properties. I'm running, 200,000 points a second with a life of 1.5 seconds with a 1 second variation, and then just change the seed. Brought in just a pop force so that I kind of got a swirling amplitude that's just creating an additional variation. And then brought in the curve force. And so this curve force basically, you saw the curve force previously in the Vellum sim, and I just wanted these to follow that same curve force. And then some drag just to slow everything down. Nothing, I just disabled the collision detection because I don't need all of those attributes, and just increase the sub steps. Now this gives me my just random color. So based on the ID, I'm just setting it just a random color based on this ramp. Then cleaning everything up so that way all we're just getting is the point in the CD, because I don't need anything else post sim. I guess now thinking about it, if I needed the velocity attribute for motion blur, I could have done that, but I did not. So there's the pop sim. Let's turn off the visualizers here. Let's just this big mass of points that are going, and based on the life, they're all gonna be dying and going away and all those things. So that's out pops, and then we have this release tendril here. Those go here, right? And then so the other branch that I did was in the MOPs infection. I needed these infected sort of bits to come out. And so that's why I created this out infected group here. And then lastly, what I did was I transferred the MOPs fall off again, and then brought in a sweep. And then so this is running over all of the geometry. I actually don't know if I'll show you why I brought this in. And then so that way I have this MOPs fall off across all of the geometry, and then I'll show you how I use that in just a second here. So coming out of all of this, we'll just hold it on this frame here. The pop import, there really wasn't anything too complicated in the import. Wait for the cat. Let's just not cache and just bring it in. Basically, this using the MOPs instancer. So I have we brought in the points, which you can't see at the moment, but there you go. They're right there. That's your template point. Basic circle. 6-sided primitive here, and then using MOPs instancer to copy this circle onto those input points, and then added some randomization for scale as well as orientation, and that is the pop sim. Let's stop simming here. The tendril import, these nothing really crazy here. Brought in the tendrils. I promoted the infect. I actually don't think I needed to do that, and we just merge them. And then I just have two different materials assigned to the different states that they're in. The last part was the hairs. So the hairs that we brought in here, I deleted a few attributes that I didn't need. We did the time shift. I did an orient, which I actually don't think I needed to do. Actually, no, the orient actually helped establish the hair rotation or positioning along the normals, which, there we go, normals, scatter the points. So this scatter points is based on this density attribute. And so this attribute rename, I went from emit to density, which in hindsight, you could probably just keep emit and then just tell it to go over the emit property. But threw on 1,000,000 points on there. And so that way we're just getting it on the end of the primitives that we have, just of the geometry. And then again, an attribute interpolate. So that way the points are actually moving with the geometry and keeping their position based on their original position. And then lastly here is a p-scale attribute that's running on all the points. So essentially we're taking we're setting a variable here called scale. And we're using the p-scale, which here we could, if actually you can just say scale plus equals this channel ramp. So what I wanted to do was just scale it based on, I guess this actually should be times equals. Okay, so we don't need this whole thing. We don't need, we can just go add scale times equal channel ramp. Okay, simplified this. Basically what this is doing is taking the incoming MOPs fall off geometry and multiplying it based on this 0 to 1 value here. And so it's I guess 1 to 0. So at first it's going to start at 1 and then it's going to gradually become smaller. So that way the hairs, as the MOPs fall off, is traveling through the primitives. What it's doing is it's shrinking their size. So it was one way of getting rid of 1,000,000 points. And then here it's just creating my my hairs. So just a line resampled. So that way I got my curve U, polyframe to get my normal tangent U, and then MOPs instancer. And the MOPs instancer is basically just going to be scattering all of the points, all of the hairs onto the points. Let's see if it'll refresh for us. Give it a second. So MOPs takes the geometry and packs it. And then once the geometry is packed, it is going to, you need to unpack it if you need to do any kind of processing on the hairs. Let's actually let me just reduce this by a few. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, we are here. Let me just show you here because it's already cached. The hairs, then after they're unpacked, I use this guide process, which is a hair tools node that allows you to take your sort of input guide geometry, which are these hair primitives. And then, so I added just a wave operation. So that gives them that sort of, random curliness to them. And so just change the amplitude settings there, and then set the scale. So that way I can bring the scale from what the line scale was, which was 0.1, but then I needed it to be much smaller, 001, 005. So, which also gives me the randomization. And so once all of that is done, what I did was I blasted anything that was going to hit a p-scale value of 0, because I didn't want the points to just remain in space. I just needed them to delete. So that way the scene sort of just got thinner during simming and just rendering and everything else. I just didn't need that geometry to be present. Okay, let's stop that again. So the hairs, I used strands, render strands. I did have to change the default scale, and I didn't need subdivisions on it, so reduce that. 3 cameras, each one of these have a chop setup that is a constraint, basically a look at constraint that's running into these nulls. These nulls are animated as well as the cameras. You can do the constraints look at using this look at. You basically click this, select the object that you want to look at something, select the thing that it wants to look at, and then you have the option to also do an up value. So you can set a third object that will essentially control the up direction of the look at properties. Once that was all set, lights, which actually animate change position based on the switcher. So the switcher takes cameras, and what it does is it becomes your camera. So this is sort of like the stage object in Cinema 4D. So you can switch between the 3 cameras here. And so you can just keyframe this property, and then it'll just switch to those cameras. Just a basic grid, big giant grid, normals, bend, UV unwrap. And I suppose lastly, the materials are nothing fancy here. The main tendrils just have some basic voxel noise that's layered across the base color, thrown into the bump as well, and then the bump has just a little extra, just more noise. So the full reflection, there's a base color, but really the subsurface takes over it. So the subsurface color, once you get that weight to 1, it takes from the base color. So this is my set radius, the scale, which is, it's sort of like the density scale of the object that you're trying to put this shader onto. And it was these I did nothing special on, just did the subsurface on, just changed their color values so that they were more on the infected dying sort of thing. We have this hair. This is great for hair. So you get, internal reflection, just diffuse, transmission, primary reflection. So these are all the properties on those little tiny hairs that are running, those strands that I created. The pops I'm bringing in the color attribute that we set, that randomized color attribute. And then I'm setting a base color and then multiplying that black to white value over the base color. So that way I'm creating just variation in the color. Background is just a basic background with some noise on it. And that's running into just some light bump mapping. This was previous. I was trying a glass thing. It didn't go. This was a GSG texture that I did not use. And I think that's it. I know that was a lot, and I ran through it kind of fast. And I hope you can see that even after going back and explaining things, you definitely run into discovering that you could have probably done things differently, optimized different ways. But I guess once you are sort of in the thick of it, you sometimes just don't think about what you're doing. Anyways, My name is Lucas. You can find me on the web at Crossfader, basically Twitter, Instagram, all the things. If you have any questions or if you just want to chat about this or whatever, just let me know. All right, peace.